You might remember the other day on the show we were discussing my obsession since I was a kid about the Shroud of Turin, and it was in the news recently saying it might, in fact, date back to the time of Jesus. Right after the show, we heard from a gentleman who is wildly familiar with the Shroud of Turin and all that it means. Russ joins us on the Mark Arum Show. Russ, good morning. Thank you for your time.
Well, thanks, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I say you know about the Shroud of Turin. You've written a book about it. You've spoken about it. I dare say you've seen it multiple times?
Well, I saw it in 98 and in 2000 and 2010. Those were some of the recent exhibitions in Turin. And it is a remarkable thing. You have this 14-foot-long linen cloth and etched with a very faint image of about a 5'10" or so, a bearded, crucified man. And, you know, it's the most analyzed artifact in the world, and yet there's no trace of paint, ink, dye, pigment, or stain. It's not the work of an artist, and so it remains one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries.
I didn't know it was 14 feet long. That's longer than I thought it would be.
It's long enough to envelop a man lengthwise, because it's only 3.5 feet wide.
Now, when did your forgive me if I'm using the incorrect term here. When did your obsession with the Shroud start?
Well, obsession is probably a good one. You know, all of us involved in the show, we call ourselves Shroudies as opposed to Trekkies.
Nice.
I was a writer for the college newspaper all the way back in 1980, so that certainly dates myself. And news of the Shroud was huge at that time. You had a team of scientists, 33 American scientists, go to Turin in 1978. They have hands-on with this cloth for 5 days, round the clock, 120 hours. And so there's lots of news coming out about it. National Geographic, they did a big piece about it in June of 1980. So I asked if I could write some articles for the college paper, and they said go for it. And that's when I did all the research and talked to some of the scientists, and I've just been hooked ever since.
Yeah, and it's led to a book, Shroud Encounter, Explore the World's Greatest Unsolved Mystery. Russ authored the book. I have some questions. So again, it popped up in the news again saying that there's the technology now says, yes, this dates back to the time of Jesus. It's not from the Middle Ages. Has there ever been any DNA or blood testing of the Shroud?
Blood tests out to be AB blood type. DNA was extracted from a blood particle from the back of the head. This was done in 1995. It is human male DNA. So now that doesn't mean it's the DNA of Jesus. It just means that the DNA we extracted from that blood stain is human male. So it appears, the blood is blood. It's not paint.
Interesting. Where could lay folks like Deborah and I get a chance to actually see the Shroud like you did?
Well, you'd have to wait for a public exhibition, which we thought was going to be next year in 25, but I don't think so. It'll be announced, and when they do, then you would set up with the Diocese of Turin, and they will have times in which there's no charge to see it, but you have to set up a time in which you're going to go see it because they don't want everyone showing up at noon. It'll be announced. It'll probably be in the next few years, but I don't think it's going to be next year.
Russ, if I drop your name, will that get me to the front of the line?
Well, with that, you can get into Walmart for free.
Awesome. Russ Brault joining us on the Mark Arum Show, expert of the Shroud of Turin. Russ, it's a historical artifact. It's a religious artifact. Who owns this artifact?
Well, as of 1983, it is now owned by the current living pope. Prior to that, it was owned by the various kings of Italy ever since 1453, and with the Catholic Church acting as kind of a custodian of it. But in 1983, when the king's only son, when he decided to get married in Las Vegas, then that was the end of that. He said, well, I can't give this to my son. Who knows what he'll do with it? So
Smart
that's
man.
That's when he willed it to the current living pope.
When was the Shroud found, discovered, what have you? And were there any other artifacts found alongside the Shroud that can, add to the veracity of that this is the Shroud of Jesus?
Well, the Shroud was removed from its historical context early first century because if you can imagine this burial linen not only etched with ostensibly the image of the resurrection, but also this whole pattern of bloodstains documenting the crucifixion, you can just imagine that would be the first thing that the Romans would want to destroy. And so they had to move it out of Jerusalem quickly, and they took it to Edessa, which would be in current day Turkey, but at the time it was part of Syria. It quickly moves out of Jerusalem into Syria, and then there's a whole historical trail that takes it to Constantinople, and ultimately then to France and to Italy, where it is now.
I remember seeing a program, I think it was on the History Channel, Russ, that talked about the DNA evidence that you discussed earlier, and it said that the blood found on the shroud wasn't a man of Jewish descent. Am I misremembering that?
Well, it's kind of a misinterpretation, and that's kind of caused by how the History Channel decided to interpret that. Anyone who has touched the cloth, their DNA is on the cloth. So there's a certain amount of DNA that the most common, what they call it, a haplogroup, which is basically an ethnic group, which is from the Druze community, and this is a people group that is very common to the Middle East. And so it appears that people of Druze background have held and handled the cloth at some point in its history, and that kind of correlates with some of the pollen evidence and limestone evidence that would all suggest that this cloth originated in and around Jerusalem.
As technology continues to advance at a rapid pace, do you think there'll be a time within our lifetimes that science can confirm yes or no, definitely this was the burial shroud of Jesus?
No, because we don't have the DNA of Jesus to match it up with the shroud. I think it'll always be a mystery. I mean, we can prove what it's not, and it's up to the individual to decide what it is. And it's not the work of an artist. It's that classic either-or proposition. It either is or it isn't. And if it isn't, then what is it? Then it must be the work of human effort, and yet it's not.
Russ, folks want more about your book, your research on the shroud. Do you have a website, social media we can find you?
You can find me at shroudencounter.com, and I have a Facebook, it's the same, and Instagram and YouTube, all under Shroud Encounter, and that's the name of the book. And you can get it at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and I think you'll find it fascinating.
Russ, such great stuff. Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate you reaching out.
Well, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it.